Run up your engines! Today I'm going to talk about a very common problem. People who have cars that start burning oil. Now, one of the most common questions I get from both viewers and my own customers is, "Hey Scotty, my car's burning some oil. What can I do about it?" Now, of course, the best thing to do is to prevent it by changing the engine oil a lot. The oil in your car's engine does two main things. It lubricates the engine, but it also helps cool it. It also does dissipate heat. And as you drive many miles, the oil gets dirty. The piston rings, of course, aren't perfect. Some of the gas blows by. It dilutes the oil. You get some carbon buildup. And dirty oil is something you don't want in your engine, because dirty oil does two main things. First, dirty oil has dirt in it, creates friction, wears things out. It can wear the seals in the engine, the rubber seals, so it will leak oil. More importantly, it can wear out your piston rings, the cylinder walls. It can do a lot of damage to metal parts by too much friction. Clean oil doesn't have abrasives in it. It's clean, very good for lubricating. Once it gets dirty, the dirt particles, they act like little sandpapers, and they will start to wear things out from too much friction that the dirt creates. And the other thing in modern cars, it's very important. Dirty oil won't flow right. And in many modern engines, like this Toyota Matrix, we'll open the hood up. These variable valve timing engines have cams that can vary how the valves open so they can pollute less and run efficiently at lower speeds. But when you want to accelerate, you can open the valves up more so you get more acceleration. And then when you go to a steady speed, go back to a lower valve duration. It gets better gas mileage once you're cruising. And dirty oil not only can also destroy the variable valve timing system, but they generally use oil pressure. And if the oil gets dirty enough, it can clog up the little screens that filter it, and the VVT system will stop working and your car will start running like crap. Now, especially with engines like Honda, they're tight tolerance engines. I don't know how many times people have brought me Hondas. They had codes for the variable valve timing system, and all I had to do was change the oil and filter, then take out the little screens that filter the variable valve timing. They were clogged up, clean them all up, put them back in, start it up with new oil and a clean screen, and they go back to running normal. So you want to make sure you use the right oil and you change it frequently. And don't push it. There's some people out there with these miracle oils that say you can change your oil every 20,000 miles. Load of nonsense. Don't push oil changes too long. Oil is cheap. Engines cost thousands of dollars. Just change it frequently and use the correct oil. Okay, so this old Celica, it tells you to use 10W30 oil. Don't put in lighter oil and don't put in heavier oil, or you can create problems. The engineers designed it for that weight oil. Now, in the olden days when I was a young mechanic, if you had a plain old V8 engine, said it had 200,000 miles, was burning a lot of oil, people would put a heavier weight oil in. They'd put like a 2050 or a straight 40 racing oil, and that thick SDP oil to prevent it from burning as much oil. Now, again, back in the day, that was okay. You had an old junker car, you're trying to make it go a little bit longer, great. But in a modern car, if it's burning oil, you do not want to put a heavier weight oil in. Because if you do in a variable valve timing engine, sometimes that can even lead to catastrophic failure after thousands of miles of having oil that's too thick in it. Now, let's say you didn't listen to Scotty, or you bought a used car that wasn't maintained right, and it's burning oil now. Well, first you want to make sure that it's burning oil and not leaking oil. So you look all around for leaks. Now, here's the thing about engine oil. You got an engine oil leak. If it's dripping down on the bottom, a quart of oil, if it leaked out, it would leave a humongous oil stain. It would be gigantic because the oil spreads out. So, if you really don't see anything dripping on the ground, it isn't leaking. Then it would have to be burning. If you have any leaks, of course, fix the leaks. That'd be the first thing to do. But if you don't see it dripping anywhere and you don't have a mess on your driveway, you know it's not leaking, you know that it's burning it. Then you pray like mad that it's a bad PCV valve that's inside here. Now, a PCV valve, or positive crankcase ventilation, that is a simple device. When your pistons fire, all that pressure pushes the piston down. All engines, as they push down, the piston rings have to seal it. So as they go down, they push a lot of air into the crankcase, which builds up positive pressure. The PCV valve relieves that pressure. You had a sealed crankcase. It went down, it would build up so much pressure, it would blow the seals out. You'd have oil leaking everywhere. So it's got to be vented out. Again, when I was a young mechanic, they didn't have PCV valves. They just had a tube that just vented the crankcase. And so when you ran the old cars, you opened the hood, you could see in the back there was just gas escaping, and that was the crankcase gas, and it would just escape right into the atmosphere, which of course polluted it. So what a PCV valve does is it takes the crankcase vapors and it then sends them into the intake manifold here, where they're then burned in the engine. Instead of being raw and pollute in the air, they go into the engine and are burned. But these valves can go bad. There's a little rattling valve inside. And its purpose is this. When it's sucking the crankcase vapor into the intake, it wants to suck only vapor and not liquid oil. If liquid oil hits the valve, it shuts the valve so it doesn't suck the oil in. Well, sometimes those valves stick a little bit open, so they suck oil in, and you'll be burning oil just because the stupid little $10 valve is bad. Most cars are easy to get to. This one is right here. You just pull the hose off, you pop that out and put another one in. Now granted, cars like this V6 Lexus can be a much bigger pain because here the valve is hidden under, down inside here. And it is kind of a pain in the rear end to get the hose off. It can be done, but you gotta unbolt a few parts to get to it. It's not that easy of a job. But if you're doing it on a cold engine, you can do it in 10-15 minutes. It's not that big of a deal. But realize some cars no longer have PCV valves. They have what they call flame traps or other devices, but they all have some kind of device that keeps the oil from being sucked into the engine and burn all the oil. So what you basically do is look up for your car, see what kind of system you have. If you got a Volvo, for instance, a lot of them have these plastic flame traps. They work the same way, and they'll clog up, and you can take them apart and clean them, or if they're broken, you can get another part and put it on. It's a very simple thing. So if your car is burning oil, what the heck? Change your PCV valve or your flame trap, whatever system you have, and hope that that's where most of the oil is getting sucked into. Because other than that, there's only relatively expensive procedures that can be done to fix a car that burns oil. Another one that isn't outrageous, but it's still somewhat expensive, is, let's say your intake manifold gasket is bad. Sometimes that will allow oil to be sucked into the intake and burned. You still got to take a lot of the engine apart to replace an intake manifold gasket, but it's better than rebuilding the engine. Now the next reason that you can be burning oil is one you don't want to happen, but it does happen. If your head gasket's starting to blow, oil will be inside the engine and it'll go right into the cylinder because it's not sealed anymore and burn oil. And in that case, you got to pull off the head, do a head gasket job. That's a very expensive job on any modern car. So before you do that, you would want to do a test. I got a whole video how to tell if your head gasket's blown. Watch that. Pretty simple test. You get blue liquid. You can buy the kit at Amazon for like 30 bucks on sale and test it. And if you see yes, your head gasket's blown, then you got to decide, do I want to spend all that money repairing that, or should I get rid of the car? And of course, the last and most serious problem that can cause oil burning is worn out piston rings, worn out block inside your engine. Now to fix that correctly, you have to totally rebuild the engine. A very expensive endeavor. But as cars age, they'll all burn a little bit of oil. Sometimes it's something you live with. In the case of my Celica here, okay, it's got like 240,000 miles. And it burns about half a quart of oil every 3,000 miles. So I live with it. Half a quart of oil every 3,000 miles. I change the oil every 3 anyways because I don't drive it that much. Doesn't really matter. I don't even care. I just live with that. But if you have a modern car, it's only a couple years old or something, it should not burn oil at all. Now I know, a lot of the car manufacturers now, you buy a late model car, it starts to burn oil, and you say, hey, it's burning a quart of oil every 1,000 miles. And they tell you that's normal. Well, it may be normal for the junk that they're building, but it's not normal for a good engine. Even before my time, in my grandfather's time, all vehicles burned oil because they weren't built that well. The pistons didn't seal all that well, and it was a regular thing. You'd fill it up with gas, and you'd fill the oil up, and away you'd go. But it hasn't been that way for a long time. 13-year-old Matrix, 18-year-old Lexus, neither of them burns any oil. When I change the oil, it's still on a full mark. Engines can be made not to burn oil if they're made correctly. So don't accept a vehicle that's pretty new, but it's burning oil and they say, oh, that's normal. It may be normal for that particular vehicle to do that, but it's because it wasn't built right in the first place. That's not your fault. That's the fault of the people that built the vehicle. A lot of vehicles today aren't built correctly, aren't even designed correctly. You get a little bitty, say, 3-cylinder engine, put a turbocharger, put gasoline direct injection on it so it can go faster. Guess what? A lot of them end up burning oil long before their time because they have all that extra pressure of GDI injectors, of a turbocharger ramming more air in. They rev higher to get more horsepower. And yes, they end up burning oil before their time. If you do buy one of these cars, change the oil a lot. If I had a car like that, I change the oil every 5,000 miles using full synthetic oil, regardless of what they told you the mileage. Oil is cheap, engines aren't. You want to keep them clean when you got a turbocharger. The oil is what lubricates the turbocharger and also cools it. Don't want to have dirty oil in one of those vehicles. You want to make sure it stays whistle clean. And if you do have one of those vehicles, realize they just came out with that 0W16 oil that's made specially for turbocharged GDI engines so the parts don't wear out. Definitely use that oil when you change the oil in any of those vehicles. It was designed just for those vehicles. So if you got an old car like my Celica, burns a little bit of oil, but it has for years, what the heck? Just add the oil, and if your spark plugs get clogged up every so often, just replace the spark plugs. Let's say you got one that's just drinking it. It's using a quart of oil every 50, 100 miles or something like that. Then it's probably time to say goodbye. But if you really want to know why it's burning the oil, you can do a test. It's called the wet-dry compression test. I've got a video on it, but basically, you take all 4 spark plugs off and take off the fuel injection fuse so the car doesn't start. Then you hook the compression gauge to each cylinder and crank it about 10 times for each one and write down what the pressures are. Then you put, say, about a teaspoon of motor oil in one cylinder, then retake the compression. That's the wet compression. You do that for all 4 cylinders. Now, if you find that the wet and dry pressures are pretty close, the wet one will be a little bit higher because the oil takes up a little bit of space, but it won't be much. But if you find that the wet compression is much higher than the dry compression in each cylinder, that means that the piston rings are worn out or the block is worn too far. Super expensive job. If the pressure didn't go up much when you put the oil in, that means that your valve seals are going bad. The valves have rubber seals on the intake so they don't suck oil in when they suck in fuel. If they go bad, it'll suck oil in and you'll burn oil that way. Now, that is still a very expensive job, changing the valve seals, even on this little 4-cylinder job. 8 intake valves. And you'd have to pull the head off, take it all apart, put new valve seals, put it back together. It's still a very expensive procedure. But granted, it's a lot cheaper than rebuilding an engine, and I've seen guys do it, but it is a bear of a job. They'll do it on the car, and what they'll do is, when they take the spark plugs out, they'll put an air hose on there, and the air pressure will hold the valves in. Then they'll take the cam off, and they'll do the valve seals on the head without pulling it off the engine. It can be done, yes. I've done it once on a Tercel ages ago. It is such a pain in the butt to do, but it's a lot cheaper than rebuilding the whole engine if the valve seals go bad. A lot of times you'll see that on an older car. They may not be that high mileage, but the valve seals on the intakes, they're rubber. After so many years of being a hot engine, guess what? The rubber's gonna crack, and of course they're gonna start sucking air because the rubber's all worn out from old age. And a really good sign of bad valve seals is your car might run perfectly fine, but if you park it and let it idle for 10 or 15 minutes, then you start seeing a bunch of smoke coming out of the exhaust. That's oil being sucked in through the valve seals while you're idling. For some reason, when they're worn, they'll often do it idling and at really low speeds. When the engine gets hot, it'll smoke more. And if it does that, that means your valve seals are bad. And as a warning, don't believe any of those miracle cans you'll see. Pour this in your engine oil, it will rebuild your engine while you drive. You know, it's a bunch of nonsense. None of that stuff works. It's all a bunch of scams. Like I said, in the past, we used to put heavier oil in. And in the old engines, you got an old V8 or something with a pushrod engine, you can do that. It isn't going to damage anything all that much. But on a modern car, you can't be throwing this heavy oil in them. Like I say, some of them are made for 0W16 oil or 10W20 oil. And if you throw in some of these oils, some of them are as much as 90 viscosity. They're super thick. The cars weren't designed for that. And you can actually create more problems putting that heavier oil in than you would just burning the lighter oil and adding it while it's gone. So now you know the truth about oil burning engines. How you really want to prevent it in the first place, but what you can do if it starts burning oil. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell